Welcome to the John Cady Podcast. I'm John Cady, former minister, U.S. Navy retired, and a man who's seen and done quite a few things. And once again, we're going to take a stroll down memory lane. Yes. Thanks to a friend of mine, Scott Reppert, who I've given a shout out to before, and I'm going to give him another shout out on this episode because he brought to my remembrance a band that is probably, in my opinion, one of the best new wave bands that came from the UK that basically never even got noticed here in the States. We're talking about the Motors. Now, the Motors were part of the punk and power pop or new wave, whatever you want to call it, in the UK beginning in 1977. That was when they formed in London. The two founding members were Nick Garvey and Andy McMaster. And then, of course, they had guitarist Rob Hendry, who didn't last very long, and Bram Tchaikovsky would take his place. Now, we're going to touch on Bram Tchaikovsky a little bit later in the podcast. But during this time frame, we're talking late 1970s to early 1980s. And I was listening to my favorite radio station, WTCS-AM 1490 in Fairmont, West Virginia. One of their big sponsors was a little coffee and record shop on Adams Street, which has long since faded into the mists of time. A little place called Alfie's Coffee and Record Shop. That was one of my favorite hangouts as a teenager. They had some decent food there. They had a jukebox that played all kinds of cool songs that you wouldn't hear anyplace else. And he had a record section that had all kinds of cool records and songs that you wouldn't find in any other record shop. And the Motors were one of those great bands that Alfie was able to get a hold of and sell copies of their releases here in the States. Probably one of the very few in America who did so. Now, going through here in the Motors discography, in the UK, they've had their first hit, which just missed the top 40 on the UK charts. It was called Dancing the Night Away. Dancing the Night Away was an awesome song, and it set the stage for what would come later. And from that debut album titled One, another track of theirs that got some airplay in Fairmont was Cold Love. Now, it wasn't too long after that, in 1978, going into early 1979, the Motors would have their biggest releases in the UK, in particular their song Airport. 1978, it would be their first and only top 10 appearance. Hit number 4 in the UK. It hit the top 40 in Australia and New Zealand, hit the top 20 in South Africa, and then in other parts of Europe, Sweden and Ireland, it was a top 10 smash over there. But the song that got the most play from their second album, approved by the Motors, wasn't Airport, but it was Forget About You. Forget About You was a really cool track, and it even had an even better B-side. Now, for any younger listeners out there, yes, back in the days of vinyl records, you had the 45 RPM record, and you had an A-side, which was typically the hit single, and then you had the B-side. And in some cases, the song that was on the B-side was even more cool to listen to than the A-side. As a teenager growing up in Fairmont, and I bought records, I found that to be the case time and time again. You know, there were a lot of cool songs I listened to growing up, and then when I flipped the record over and played the B-side, lo and behold, I got an even better surprise. And Forget About You, which was a good song in of itself, I flipped it over. Now, the B-side that was here in America was a 4.5-minute piece called Breathless. And Breathless, I thought, was an even better song than the A-side. I practically played the grooves off of that one. Now, the European release of Forget About You had a medley which included Picturama, The Middle Bit, and Soul Surrender, which, thanks to my friend Scott Reppert again, it was able to be available here in the States because he was able to find a copy, remix it, and upload it. And there you go. So you finally get to enjoy it here in America. It has long since been forgotten. Now, moving on down in their discography, up until 1981, they had a few other hits. So they had Love and Loneliness was their last chart single in the UK. And Love and Loneliness, I didn't know this, but Love and Loneliness was their only chart single here in the U.S. It hit number 78 on the Hot 100. So, it kind of like came and went, like a blip on the radar, and it was gone. And in Canada, it fared a little better, went up to number 60. But by the early 80s, the voters had basically fizzled out, and we've never really heard any new material from them since. But they had a lot of cool songs, A-sides and B-sides alike, and they were very enjoyable. Now, Bram Tchaikovsky, we're coming back to him now. Bram Tchaikovsky had a very unique song, and he managed to do, as a solo artist, what he and the Motors couldn't do, and that was he managed to crack the top 40 here in the U.S. in 1979. In 1979, he released an awesome power pop anthem called Girl of My Dreams. Now, this was another case of how a song was so well written that it flew under the radar. Radio station playlist managers didn't even catch the joke about the song. But if you pay attention real close, he says it right there. She arrived in the U.S. mail. I'm not going to go any further on that because, why? I don't wish to be demonetized. Think about it for a minute and you'll understand what kind of a girl he was singing about. And here we were, a bunch of teenagers in 1979. We were listening to and jamming to this song, totally oblivious to its content. And Bram Tchaikovsky laughed all the way to the bank. He hit the top 40 here in the States, getting as high as number 37, and the song actually hit number 20 in Canada. So, if anyone feels that they were duped when they listened to it, don't feel bad. We all were. So, they were an awesome band, and I don't know if any of them would ever consider a reunion, but even if they don't, the fact that my hometown radio station played them, it helped make my teenage years more enjoyable because this was stuff that nobody else was playing, nobody else knew existed. That was what made WTCS a memorable station, even though it was just a little tiny radio station on top of a hill in a small town in West Virginia. But a lot of good memories, a lot of good music, and a lot of good programming came from it. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. This is John Cady. If you like the podcast, please hit the like or subscribe button. And I'm going to catch you on the next one.